this is going to be one of those fun lessons because I know there are so many of you out there who just love to be corrected. I mean, you know, the very instant that you're wrong in any way, somebody's right there in your face going, that's wrong. And then they make it 10 times worse by proving the fact that it is wrong, whatever it is you're saying or doing. We just love that, do we not? Okay, maybe not. I can't speak for you, but I don't like that much. I mean, in the first place, I don't like to be wrong. In the second, I hate for it when it goes public. And then in the third place, somebody else saw it and realized that's not right. And I realized my influence has been compromised. Those kinds of things, I am sure, are some of the reasons why Jeremiah was so incredibly sad, embarrassed, disappointed, and here he stands in the wreckage of what once used to be a great city, mourning the fact that God got fed up with it and took care of business. Now I want to reference you to Hebrews the 12th chapter right quick before we start our Lamentation text, because I think there are some things we need to understand about correction in general, but particularly the way God corrects. Because we understand if we love our kids, we're going to correct them. And so would we expect otherwise from God? And so the Hebrew writer writes in Hebrews chapter 12, begin with me in verse 7. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. Or what son is there whom a father does not chasten? And if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful in the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Yeah, that's a kind of a great summation of what's going on in Lamentation, although on a much more massive scale. Jeremiah had spent his whole life warning Israel, along with many other prophets, that, you know, if you don't straighten up, God is going to get tired of this. Now, granted, with God, time is not really a relevant factor, but he gives people long enough to get their act together. He waited for Canaan for nearly 400 years before the Israelites came in, and served as a tool, really, to correct the Canaanites because they had left God. In the same sense, he tolerated Israel for who knows how long before he finally said, I'm fed up and tired of it. And in comes Assyria in the north and wipes out the top 10 tribes. And then not long after that, Nebuchadnezzar comes in and wipes out the bottom 2 tribes. And for 70 years, the tribes of Judah and those in the south stayed in Babylonian captivity and finally came back home, and still they were struggling. And it makes you wonder, did we not pay attention to the chastening? Now, I can't speak for you, but my father chastened me when I was a child. And of course, I did not love it. But I understood he did it because he loved me. I think one of the most traumatic experiences over which I had, you know, a fellow almost needs therapy, is when I was 12 years old and I got my last spanking. And I'm telling you what, I was bowed up as 12 years old. I was doing stuff that grown men were doing on a ranch, and I wasn't about to cry. Now I did because it hurt. But I wasn't about to let on like this was any big thing, but he knew at that moment, my dad's a pretty smart guy, that this spanking is really not doing it. And so after the spanking, he set me down, he put his arm around me, and one or maybe 2 times in my whole life, he said, Jeff, I love you. And you know, I just as soon be beat, because I didn't want him to tell me he loved me. He's hurting me. This is not pleasant. I think very much and too often we look at correction from a negative view. It's not fun to be corrected, okay? That's what God said in Hebrews. It's not fun. But there are some productive things about being corrected, and maybe we ought to think about it a little before we immediately get upset and decide, who is that to tell me what so-and-so? You know, and that's really an honest, easy response to have when somebody corrects you. I mean, It's the disappointment in yourself because you didn't do something as well as what you thought you should. It's a disappointment because somebody else saw it, it's public. And then it's a disappointment because maybe somebody offers some advice or some correction or some direction that will help us not do that again. And the question would be, number one, why didn't I see that? Or number two, I saw that, but I didn't do it. Why didn't I do that? It's just embarrassing all around to be corrected. It's not a fun thing. But there are so many good, productive things that can come from it. I want to look at the lamentation of Jeremiah. I want to look at just a few verses here and point out, and this is just a bare minimum, trust me. This entire book is full of these kinds of examples, okay? If you really look close. I want you to look at verse 22. Here's the first one. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed. I can't speak for you, but I'll go back to my upbringing. I don't recall a time, as hard as Dad and Nib tried to spank me, when I got what I really deserved. Because I did some stuff. I even got away with some stuff. But very often it was the case out of my father's pity, because he thought he beat me too much. I didn't get what I deserved. And when you really think about it, when we slight our Savior, in fact, in Hebrews it talks about when we sin willfully, we crucify the Christ again, afresh. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but you realize how grotesque and how horrible and how mean a response it is when we don't respond to God correctly and we sin, and we know we shouldn't sin, but we do it anyway. What are we doing? Crucifying Jesus. Read sometimes the end of Matthew, Mark, and John particularly, but Luke has some really graphic, Luke being a doctor, expressions of how Jesus was crucified. When we sin willfully, that's what we're doing. So no, we don't normally get what we deserve, and I'll guarantee you by God's grace and His mercy, we don't get what we deserve because we sin. So when we look at the correction we receive, let's understand it could be worse. It probably should be worse, but it's not, because someone loves us and has mercy. Second one, in verse 25, the Lord is good to those who wait on Him, to the soul who seeks Him. And I guess it really does come down to attitude as to whether or not we want to know the truth. Now, I covered that real good this morning. Not going to rehash that. But frankly, folks, part of correction has to do with the idea that I can be taught. And I tell you, when we get to a point where we think we know so much that you can't tell me anything, we're in trouble. Because I've been taught by some of the folks that you wouldn't believe would be so low on the totem pole, intelligence, IQ-wise, or whatever you might call that, but they have lessons to teach. It's amazing when you're looking to learn how many people, how many ways in which you can be taught. If we are really seeking God, one of the things that just comes naturally with learning about God is learning what I did wrong and how I fix it. Because we are not naturally just given to doing things right. We got to be schooled and educated in how to do them right, and then we got to fix our attitude so that we can do them right. Correction is how we learn very often. In fact, people call it experience sometimes. Experience is a very harsh teacher on occasion, because very often it gives us what we deserve when we do something, and then we reap the consequences of what we've done. Look at verse 29. And it talks about, well, actually verse 28, let him sit alone and keep silent, because this has to do with your attitude again. Because God has laid it on him. Let him put his mouth to the dust, or in the dust, that there may be yet hope. You know, the only way only way correction really works is if we learn from it. I don't know about you, but I've known people, I don't care how many times they're corrected, they go back to the same thing. I've had animals that just are not smart. I had a Beagle Pekingese cross dog. Now I'm telling you right now, that was wrong. Somebody got mutated form of a dog there, shouldn't have been. But he was not smart. This dog would run off into the front yard in our big house there in Utopia and run off down there, and he'd be barking and baying like all beagles do, and then as a Pekingese he'd come to himself and realize, I'm lost, where am I? And he would whimper and whine. I think people like that sometimes. I think they got mutated here somewhere along the line and don't even realize they're so lost they need to be corrected, and if they would listen to the correction, they could get back home where they need to be. I'm not comparing people to a dog, okay? I'm just saying there's some features that are similar, okay? But the point being, we have to have an attitude where, yeah, there's hope if you'll humble yourself. It's when we don't want to humble ourselves, we don't learn, we're going to have trouble. And again, and number 4, real quickly, in verse 31 through 34. And this is the one that we need to really put into our heart and really accept and understand when we are corrected. The Lord doesn't cast off forever. That's number 1 of this last point. The Lord will not give up on you. As long as you are breathing, there is hope. Okay? And the point being is, don't think He'll wait forever. In fact, if anything, lamentation is a punctuation mark on God getting fed up. I mean, is not Noah and the account of his destruction of the world through that flood an explanation point of the fact that God does get to an ending point and say, I'm done now? You know, very often it is with parents, and I'm guilty as anybody, so I'm speaking to myself as anybody else. You know the kid deserves whipping. You know it probably doing good to get a whipping. But you know, for whatever reason, it's like, oh, I'll let you slide this time. Okay, just because we do that thinking it's love, God doesn't function that way. His patience comes before His castigation, His chastening. And He's very patient, long-suffering, not willing that any should perish. We're still breathing because God is giving us an opportunity to get our life right, okay? If your life's not right, shame on you. Get it right now. Because one of these days, God's patience is going to wear out. And when it does, you look at Lamentations. Jerusalem, I don't know whether you've ever studied the history of the Babylonian conquest. It came in like 3 stages. Oh, it was horrid, terrible, people eating their babies, that kind of thing. It's gross. But God was patient. But when God comes to the end of it, it's like, okay, you need to be chastened, okay? But He won't cast off forever. And this is something people don't realize from a good, loving, merciful God. This is the Scriptures, folks. Though He causes grief, yet He will show compassion. You have grief in your life, sometimes God is trying to slap you down and get your attention. He's trying to tell you, wake up. Snap out of it. Get your life back in order. Sometimes the things that we call self-inflicted wounds are merely the right consequences of poor decisions. And God has told us, if you do what's right, I'll bless you. If you do what's wrong, you get cursed. We're trying to wake up here and do what's right. There is a very productive thing about consequences, okay? Part of the justice problem we have in this country socially and publicly is the fact there's no consequences. There are people in our higher offices in government that have done deplorable things, and all they do is back on, oh, my bad, and I've got 6 lawyers, and they'll never be prosecuted. Trust me. We were talking about that this afternoon a while ago. Oh, I wish somebody would get prosecuted for this, that, or the other. Me too, but it isn't going to happen, okay? That's not how humans work. People get away with stuff, but you'll not get away with stuff with God. But understand, His chastening is such that He will cause you grief, but not forever. He shows compassion. He will show compassion, but here's the point that I want to make as a conclusion in verse 33. And this is something we understand, because Dad used to tell me this, and it's like, come on, Dad, you just beat the tar out of me. I could barely walk. Well, it wasn't that bad, but He whooped me hard sometimes. And then He'd say, and you've heard those words, this hurts me more than it hurts you. And I'm thinking, give me the battle. Let's try that. See if it works. But you know what? God makes the statement here. He does not afflict willingly nor grieve the children of men. That's not His purpose. He's not there to punish you because He enjoys punishing you. I always get the picture of that cartoon I saw years ago where God is this snowy-haired, long-bearded, white-bearded guy sitting up in the computer room in the sky with his keyboard out there, and there's a big button right in the middle that says smite, and He's about to hit it. That's not our God. He is so merciful. He is so long-suffering. He is so willing for us to learn through correction that He is willing to give. Sometimes the correction seems overwhelming. That's what Jeremiah is dealing with. How do you rebuild this city He has just totally, completely devastated? Well, it's a lesson. It's a lesson that we ought to follow God and do what He said. It's a lesson we ought to be humble, and we ought to, revamp our mind. And it's a lesson we ought to look at this as correction from God and know it's going to end. I know sometimes when Dad whipped me, I thought he'd never quit. But he did. He always did. He quit. When God corrects, it's not forever. He's not there just to grieve you, to hurt you, to make you, be in pain. That's not what He's doing this for. This is a learning curve. It's a lesson in how we can be better. And frankly, we ought to emulate our God. We ought never, out of anger or out of frustration even, out of malice, say things or do things to our Christian brothers and sisters. We ought to be there to help them. Galatians 6:1, those who are spiritual, carry the burdens of those that struggle and those who are overtaken in a fault. Because you've got a fault or because I have a fault doesn't make me better than you or you better than me. We're in this together. And if we correct like God, we're going to correct so that we learn in humility, accept that yes, I'm not perfect, I do need to correct, and I will try better and try harder to do what I do better so I glorify God. And we help each other in that way. And that's the way we ought to receive correction from each other. And it is certainly the way we ought to receive correction from God, whether it be the preacher or a class teacher or a friend who comes to you with something in the Bible that they can show you and say, you know what, let me help you do something better in your life. Oh, it's not fun, especially when it goes public. It's not fun. It's not pleasant to be disappointed, not just because people know about it, because I'm disappointed myself, and I didn't do this the best I could, the way I should have. That's disappointing. It gets embarrassing. But it does absolutely no good whatsoever to receive correction if we don't understand from the correction that God loves us. He doesn't do this out of meanness. He does it because He wants us to be better and more like Him. The analogy in Hebrews where, a father corrects his child. Our fathers were not perfect. Trust me, my dad wasn't perfect. Okay? Of course, speaking as a father, neither was I. But I tell you what, my Father in heaven is perfect. And His correction, I need to receive. I'd invite you to receive that correction. If you're not living right, if you're not doing the things you ought to be doing, there is no excuse for it. And understand that God will come to the end of it at some point in time. Please let that end come before you go to the judgment when it's everlastingly too late. Understand the consequences of what you've done wrong and change what you're doing. Change your life so you're a better person, giving God glory. If you need to change in any way, we offer that opportunity in the song we're singing. Won't you stand?